The sky above Earth split open with a deafening roar, as if the heavens themselves were tearing apart. A massive alien warship, larger than any city, descended from the clouds. Its dark, jagged hull glistened under the sun, and its engines hummed with a power that made the ground tremble. People across the planet looked up in terror, their hearts pounding as the ship's shadow swallowed entire towns. The alien's voice boomed across the globe, speaking in a language no one understood at first. Then, with a crackle, their words translated into every human tongue. "People of Earth," the voice declared, cold and unfeeling, "your planet is now ours. Surrender, or face annihilation." Panic spread like wildfire. Governments scrambled to respond, but their weapons were useless against the sheer size of the warship. The aliens, confident in their superiority, began their descent toward the planet's surface. But as they approached, something strange caught their attention. The Earth below was not the pristine, untouched world they had expected. Instead, it was littered with the wreckage of countless spacecraft. Massive metal hulls, broken and rusted, lay scattered across deserts, mountains, and oceans. Some were ancient, covered in vines and dust, while others looked as if they had crashed only recently. It was a graveyard of ships, a silent testament to battles fought long before humans had even existed. The alien commander, a tall, imposing figure with glowing eyes, stared at the scene from the ship's observation deck. "What is this?" he muttered, his voice tinged with unease. "This planet was supposed to be primitive. Why are there so many wrecks?" His second-in-command, a smaller but equally intimidating alien, stepped forward. "Perhaps others tried to conquer this world before us," he suggested. "But they failed. We are stronger. We will not make the same mistake." The commander nodded, but a flicker of doubt crossed his face. "Send a team to the surface," he ordered. "I want to know what happened here." As the alien landing crafts descended, the humans watched from hidden bunkers and shelters. They had seen this before, aliens arriving with grand promises of conquest, only to meet a grim fate. But this time, something felt different. These aliens were more advanced, more dangerous. Would Earth's mysterious protectors rise again to defend it? The landing crafts touched down near a massive, ancient wreck. The aliens stepped out, their weapons ready, their eyes scanning the eerie landscape. The air was thick with tension, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. One of the aliens, a young soldier, knelt to examine a piece of debris. It was covered in strange symbols, unlike anything they had ever seen. "Commander," he called out, his voice trembling. "This technology, it's far beyond ours. What kind of creatures could have built this?" The commander didn't answer. He was too busy staring at the horizon, where the ruins of countless ships stretched as far as the eye could see. For the first time in his life, he felt a flicker of fear. What had they stumbled into? Little did they know, deep beneath the Earth's surface, something was stirring. Something ancient. Something powerful. And it was watching. The alien soldiers moved cautiously through the wreckage, their weapons glowing faintly in the dim light. The air was thick with the scent of rust and decay, and the ground crunched under their feet with every step. The commander led the way, his glowing eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. But the only sound was the wind whistling through the broken hulls of ancient ships. "This place is a tomb," one of the soldiers muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. What could have done this? The commander didn't answer. He was too focused on the task at hand. They needed to find answers, and quickly. But as they ventured deeper into the graveyard, they began to notice something strange. The wreckage wasn't just random debris, it was arranged in patterns, almost like a warning. Some of the ships were piled high, forming walls that seemed to block their path. Others were twisted into strange shapes, as if they had been melted by some unimaginable force. "Commander," the second-in-command said, his voice tense. "I don't like this. We should turn back." Before the commander could respond, a noise echoed through the graveyard. It was faint at first, like the rustling of leaves, but it grew louder with every passing second. The aliens froze, their weapons raised, their eyes darting in every direction. Then, out of the shadows, a group of humans emerged. They were dressed in ragged clothing, their faces gaunt and weary, but their eyes burned with determination. They carried makeshift weapons, sticks, rocks, and pieces of metal, but they moved with a confidence that made the aliens hesitate. The commander stepped forward, his weapon aimed at the humans. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice booming. "What is this place?" The humans didn't answer at first. They simply stared at the aliens, their expressions unreadable. Then, one of them, a tall man with graying hair and a scar across his face, stepped forward. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This planet, it's not what you think." The commander narrowed his eyes. "Explain yourself, human." "What do you mean?" The man glanced at the wreckage around them, then back at the aliens. "This is a graveyard," he said. "A graveyard for those who thought they could conquer Earth. Every ship you see here, they all came with the same goal as you. And they all failed." The aliens exchanged uneasy glances. The commander tightened his grip on his weapon. "You expect us to believe that?" he snapped. "You're nothing but primitives. How could you possibly defeat us?" The man smiled faintly, but there was no humor in his eyes. "We didn't defeat them," he said. "Something else did. Something that's been here long before us. And it's still here." The words sent a chill through the aliens. The commander opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The humans backed away, their faces pale with fear. "What's happening?" one of the soldiers shouted, his voice panicked. The man with the scar looked at the commander, his expression grim. "It's too late," he said. "You woke it up." The trembling grew stronger, and a low, rumbling sound filled the air. The aliens turned just in time to see a massive crack forming in the ground, splitting the earth apart. From the darkness below, a faint glow began to rise. The commander's heart pounded in his chest. "Fall back," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the noise. "Fall back now." But it was too late. The ground erupted, and a blinding light shot into the sky. The aliens shielded their eyes, their weapons falling from their hands. The humans watched in silence, their faces filled with a mixture of fear and awe. As the light faded, the aliens saw something that made their blood run cold. Rising from the ground was a massive, ancient structure, its surface covered in glowing symbols. It hummed with a power that made the air vibrate, and its presence was overwhelming. The commander stared at the structure, his mind racing. What was this thing? And why had it been buried beneath the earth? The man with the scar stepped forward once more, his voice barely a whisper. "You should have listened," he said. "Now it's too late." The aliens didn't respond. They were too busy staring at the structure, their confidence shattered. For the first time, they realized that they were not the most powerful beings in the universe. And they were not alone. The massive structure loomed over the aliens, its glowing symbols pulsing like a heartbeat. The air around it crackled with energy, and the ground continued to tremble as if the earth itself was alive. The humans stood at a distance, their faces pale but resolute. They had seen this before, and they knew what was coming. The alien commander, still reeling from the shock, turned to the man with the scar. "What is this thing?" he demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "Tell me now, or I'll—" "Or you'll what?" the man interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "Destroy us? You've already seen what happens to those who try to conquer this planet. Do you really think you're any different?" The commander hesitated, his weapon lowering slightly. He glanced at the structure, then back at the humans. "Explain," he said, his tone softer, but still urgent. "What is this place? What happened here?" The man sighed, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world was on them. "This," he said, gesturing to the structure, "is the reason Earth is still here. It's a defense system, built by an ancient civilization that once called this planet home. They were far more advanced than any of us, more advanced than you. But they knew their time was ending, so they left this behind to protect their world. The aliens listened in stunned silence, their earlier arrogance replaced by a growing sense of dread. The commander second in command stepped forward, his voice shaky. "If this thing is so powerful, why haven't you used it to conquer others? Why stay hidden?" The man shook his head. "It's not a weapon we control. It's autonomous. It only activates when Earth is threatened. And when it does," he trailed off, his eyes distant. "Nothing survives." The commander's mind raced as he tried to process the information. "So every ship here," he said, gesturing to the wreckage around them, "they were all destroyed by this thing?" The man nodded. "Every single one. Some came with armies, others with fleets. They all thought they could take this planet. They were wrong." The aliens exchanged uneasy glances. The young soldier who had examined the debris earlier spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "But why? Why would this civilization create something so destructive? What were they protecting?" The man's expression darkened. "We don't know for sure. The ancient ones left no records, no explanations. But we've pieced together some clues over the years. They believed Earth was special, not because of its resources, but because of its potential. They saw something in this planet, something worth protecting at all costs." The commander frowned. "Potential for what?" The man shrugged. "We don't know. Maybe they saw a future where humanity could thrive. Or maybe they saw something else entirely. Whatever it was, they were willing to sacrifice everything to keep it safe." The aliens fell silent, the weight of the man's words sinking in. The commander stared at the structure, his mind racing. He had come to Earth expecting an easy conquest, but now he was faced with a force beyond his understanding. And worse, he realized that his actions had awakened something that could destroy them all. The man with the scar stepped closer, his voice low and urgent. "You need to leave," he said. "Now. Before it's too late." The commander shook his head. "We can't just leave. Our ship is still in orbit. If we abandon it..." "Your ship is already lost," the man interrupted. "The moment you entered this planet's atmosphere, you sealed its fate. The defense system doesn't just target invaders on the ground. It destroys everything." The commander's heart sank. He turned to his second-in-command, who was already speaking into a communicator, trying to contact their ship. But there was no response, only static. The man with the scar placed a hand on the commander's shoulder, his expression softening. "I'm sorry," he said. "But this is how it's always been. No one leaves this planet alive." The commander stared at him, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. Fear, anger, regret, all of it swirled together, leaving him speechless. For the first time in his life, he felt truly powerless. But before he could respond, the structure began to hum louder, its glow intensifying. The humans backed away, their faces filled with dread. "It's starting," the man said, his voice barely audible over the noise. "You need to run. Now." The aliens didn't need to be told twice. They turned and fled, their earlier confidence replaced by sheer panic. But as they ran, the commander couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late. Behind them, the structure's glow grew brighter, and a low, ominous tone filled the air. The defense system was awake. And it was coming for them. The ground shook violently as the ancient structure's hum grew into a deafening roar. The glowing symbols on its surface pulsed faster, casting an eerie light over the graveyard of ships. The aliens ran, their heavy boots pounding against the cracked earth, but the humans stood their ground, their faces grim but resolute. The man with the scar watched as the aliens fled, his expression unreadable. He turned to the others and shouted over the noise, "Get to the bunkers. Now." The humans didn't hesitate. They scattered, disappearing into hidden tunnels and shelters that had been dug into the ground long ago. The man lingered for a moment, his eyes fixed on the structure. He had seen this before, but it never got easier. The power of the ancient defense system was beyond comprehension, and its wrath was unstoppable. The alien commander, panting and disoriented, stumbled as the ground beneath him cracked open. He looked back and saw the structure rising higher, its glow now blinding. From its base, tendrils of light began to spread across the ground, snaking toward the fleeing aliens like living things. "What is that?" one of the soldiers screamed, his voice filled with terror. The commander didn't answer. He didn't know. All he could do was run. But as he glanced over his shoulder, he saw the tendrils of light closing in. They moved faster than anything he had ever seen, and they seemed to have a mind of their own. One of the soldiers tripped and fell, his weapon clattering to the ground. Before he could get up, a tendril of light wrapped around his leg. He screamed as it burned through his armor, searing his flesh. The other soldiers tried to help him, but the light spread quickly, engulfing him completely. In seconds, he was gone, nothing but a pile of ash. The commander's heart pounded in his chest. He had faced countless battles, but nothing like this. This wasn't war, it was annihilation. "Keep moving," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "Don't stop." But the tendrils of light were everywhere now, cutting off their escape. The aliens were trapped, their weapons useless against the ancient power of the defense system. The commander looked around desperately, searching for a way out, but there was none. Then, he saw the humans. They were standing at the edge of the graveyard, watching silently. The man with the scar stepped forward, his eyes meeting the commander's. For a moment, there was no hatred, no fear, just understanding. "You can't outrun it," the man said, his voice carrying over the noise. "But you might survive if you listen to us." The commander hesitated. He didn't trust the humans, but what choice did he have? The tendrils of light were closing in, and his soldiers were falling one by one. "What do we do?" he shouted, his voice desperate. The man pointed to a nearby wreck, a massive, ancient ship that had been partially buried in the ground. "Get inside," he yelled. "It's the only place the light can't reach." The commander didn't question it. He grabbed his remaining soldiers and sprinted toward the wreck, the tendrils of light hot on their heels. The humans followed, guiding them through the maze of debris. As they reached the ship, the man with the scar pried open a rusted hatch. "Inside. Now." The aliens scrambled in, their armor clanking against the metal walls. The humans followed, sealing the hatch behind them. The interior of the ship was dark and cramped, but it was safe, for now. Outside, the tendrils of light slammed against the wreck, searching for a way in. The commander could hear the sound of metal groaning under the pressure, but the ancient ship held firm. The man with the scar leaned against the wall, his breathing heavy. "It'll pass," he said. "But we need to stay here until it's over." The commander stared at him, his mind racing. "Why are you helping us?" he asked, his voice filled with suspicion. The man met his gaze, his expression weary but determined. "Because no one deserves to die like this," he said. "Not even you." The aliens fell silent, their earlier arrogance replaced by a growing sense of humility. They had come to Earth as conquerors, but now they were at the mercy of its protectors, and its people. Outside, the defense system's hum grew louder, and the ground shook with such force that the wreck shifted. The commander closed his eyes, his mind filled with questions. What was this planet? Why had so many tried to conquer it? And what had they awakened? But for now, there were no answers. Only survival. The ancient wreck groaned under the pressure of the defense system's attack. The tendrils of light slammed against its hull, their glow seeping through cracks in the metal. Inside, the air was thick with tension as the aliens and humans huddled together, their differences momentarily forgotten. The alien commander leaned against the wall, his breathing ragged. He glanced at the man with the scar, who was peering through a small crack in the hull, watching the chaos outside. "How long will this last?" the commander asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't look at him. "As long as it takes," he said grimly. "The system won't stop until it's sure the threat is gone." The commander clenched his fists, frustration and fear warring within him. There has to be a way to fight back. We can't just sit here and wait to die. The man finally turned to him, his expression hard. Fight back? With what? Your weapons? Your technology? None of that matters here. This thing was built by a civilization so advanced, we can't even begin to understand it. The only reason we're still alive is because this wreck is made of the same material as the structure. It's the only thing the system can't destroy. The commander fell silent, his mind racing. He had always believed in the superiority of his kind, but now he was faced with a force that made even his mighty warship seem insignificant. For the first time, he felt truly small. Outside, the defense system's hum grew louder, and the ground shook with such force that the wreck shifted again. One of the alien soldiers lost his balance and fell, his armor clattering against the metal floor. The humans instinctively reached out to help him, their actions surprising the aliens. The soldier looked up at them, his glowing eyes wide with confusion. "Why are you helping us?" he asked, his voice trembling. One of the humans, a young woman with dirt-streaked hair, shrugged. "Because we're not monsters," she said simply. "And because we've all been where you are now." The soldier stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Thank you," he said quietly. The moment was interrupted by a loud crash as part of the wreck's ceiling caved in, sending debris raining down. The group scrambled to avoid being hit, their temporary refuge becoming more unstable by the minute. The man with the scar cursed under his breath. "We can't stay here much longer," he said. "If the wreck collapses, we're done for." The commander stepped forward, his earlier frustration replaced by determination. "Then we need a plan. You know this planet better than we do. Tell us what to do." The man hesitated, then nodded. "There's a place," he said. "A bunker deep underground. It's the only spot the system can't reach. But it's far, and we'll have to move fast." The commander turned to his soldiers. "You heard him. We move as one. No one gets left behind." The group nodded, their earlier fear replaced by a grim resolve. The man with the scar led the way, prying open the hatch and peering outside. The tendrils of light were still there, but they seemed less focused now, as if the system was searching for them. "Stay close," the man whispered. "And whatever you do, don't touch the light." They moved quickly, weaving through the graveyard of ships. The tendrils of light lashed out at them, but the group dodged and ducked, their movements fueled by adrenaline. The humans guided the aliens, their knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable. But the defense system wasn't done yet. As they neared the edge of the graveyard, the ground erupted in front of them, blocking their path. The structure's hum grew louder, and a new wave of tendrils shot out, more aggressive than before. The commander cursed, his mind racing. "We're not going to make it," he said, his voice filled with despair. The man with the scar shook his head. "We have to," he said firmly. "There's no other choice." He pointed to a narrow path between two massive wrecks. "This way. Hurry." The group sprinted toward the path, the tendrils of light hot on their heels. But as they reached the entrance, one of the alien soldiers tripped, his leg caught in a crevice. The tendrils closed in, their glow intensifying. The commander turned back, his instincts screaming at him to keep running. But he couldn't leave his soldier behind. He grabbed the man's arm and pulled with all his strength, but it was no use. The tendrils were too close. Then, one of the humans, a young man with a determined look, stepped forward. He grabbed a piece of debris and hurled it at the tendrils, distracting them just long enough for the commander to free his soldier. "Move," the young man shouted, his voice filled with urgency. The group didn't need to be told twice. They ran through the narrow path, the tendrils of light snapping at their heels. As they emerged on the other side, they saw it, a massive metal door set into the ground, partially hidden by rubble. "There," the man with the scar shouted. "The bunker." They sprinted toward it, their lungs burning, their legs aching. The tendrils of light were right behind them, their glow casting long shadows on the ground. The man with the scar reached the door first, yanking it open with all his strength. Inside. Now. The group piled in, the door slamming shut just as the tendrils of light reached it. The sound of the defense system's hum faded, replaced by an eerie silence. For a moment, no one spoke. They simply sat there, their breathing heavy, their hearts pounding. They had made it, but at what cost? The commander looked at the humans, his expression filled with gratitude and respect. "Thank you," he said quietly. "We wouldn't have made it without you." The man with the scar nodded, his face weary but relieved. "Don't thank us yet," he said. "We're not out of this." The underground bunker was cold and dimly lit, its walls lined with ancient machinery that hummed faintly. The group sat in silence, their exhaustion palpable. The aliens and humans, once enemies, now shared the same space, their differences overshadowed by the need to survive. The alien commander leaned against the wall, his glowing eyes scanning the room. He turned to the man with the scar, who was examining a control panel on the far side of the bunker. "What now?" the commander asked, his voice low. "We can't stay here forever." The man didn't look up. "We won't have to," he said. "This bunker is connected to a network of tunnels. If we can reach the central hub, we might be able to shut down the defense system, or at least buy ourselves some time." The commander frowned. "You said the system was autonomous. How can we shut it down?" The man finally turned to face him, his expression serious. "We can't. Not completely. But we can disrupt it long enough to get off this planet. The system has a weak point, a core that powers it. If we can damage the core, it'll go into a temporary shutdown. That's our only chance." The commander hesitated, his mind racing. "And how do we find this core?" The man pointed to a map on the wall, its lines faded but still legible. "It's here," he said, tapping a spot deep within the earth. "But getting there won't be easy. The tunnels are unstable, and the system will be watching." The commander studied the map, his jaw tightening. "It's a suicide mission." The man nodded. "Probably. But it's the only way." The room fell silent as the weight of the decision settled over them. The aliens exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier confidence shattered. The humans, too, looked grim, their faces etched with fear and determination. Finally, the commander spoke. "We'll do it," he said, his voice firm. "But we'll need to work together. Your knowledge of this planet and our technology, combined, we might have a chance." The man with the scar nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Agreed. But we need to move quickly. The longer we wait, the harder it'll be." The group began to prepare, gathering whatever supplies they could find. The humans shared their knowledge of the tunnels, while the aliens offered their advanced tools and weapons. It was an uneasy alliance, but necessity had forced them to set aside their differences. As they worked, the young human woman who had helped the alien soldier earlier approached him. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice soft. The soldier looked at her, surprised. "I am called Krell," he said. "And you?" "Lena," she replied with a small smile. "I just wanted to say, thank you. For trusting us." Krell hesitated, then nodded. "You saved my life," he said. "I won't forget that." The moment was interrupted by the man with the scar, who called the group together. "Listen up," he said. "The core is deep, and the tunnels are dangerous. We'll need to move fast and stay quiet. If the system detects us, it's over." The group nodded, their faces set with determination. The man led the way, opening a heavy metal door that led into a narrow tunnel. The air inside was damp and cold, and the walls were lined with glowing symbols similar to those on the surface structure. As they moved deeper, the tension grew. Every sound, every flicker of light, made them pause, their hearts pounding. The aliens, used to the open skies of space, felt claustrophobic in the tight confines of the tunnel. The humans, though more accustomed to the underground, were equally on edge. After what felt like hours, they reached a large chamber. In the center was a massive, glowing orb, the core of the defense system. It pulsed with a rhythmic light, its energy radiating through the room. The man with the scar turned to the group. "This is it," he said. "We need to damage the core, but we have to be careful. If we destroy it completely, the system might go into overdrive and take the planet with it." The commander stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the core. "What's the plan?" The man pointed to a series of conduits surrounding the core. "If we overload those, it should disrupt the system long enough for us to escape. But it'll take precision. One wrong move, and we're done." The commander nodded. "We'll handle it. Krell, you're with me. The rest of you, stay back." The two aliens moved cautiously toward the core, their tools ready. The humans watched nervously, their breaths held. As Krell and the commander worked, the core's glow began to flicker, its rhythm disrupted. But then, the room began to shake. The system had detected their presence. "Hurry," the man with the scar shouted, his voice filled with urgency. The commander and Krell worked faster, their hands moving with precision. The core's glow intensified, and a low, ominous hum filled the air. "It's going to blow," Krell shouted, his voice panicked. The commander grabbed him and pulled him back, just as the core erupted in a blinding flash of light. The room shook violently, and the group was thrown to the ground. When the light faded, the core was dark, its energy drained. The defense system's hum had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. The man with the scar stood up, his face pale but relieved. "We did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The system's down." The group erupted in cheers, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten. The aliens and humans embraced, their earlier animosity replaced by a shared sense of triumph. But the celebration was short-lived. The ground began to shake again, and the walls of the chamber started to crack. "We need to move," the man shouted. "The system's collapse is destabilizing the tunnels." The group didn't need to be told twice. They ran back through the tunnels, their hearts pounding as the walls crumbled around them. The race against time had begun, and their survival was far from guaranteed. The tunnels shook violently as the group sprinted toward the surface, their footsteps echoing in the narrow passageways. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling, and the air grew thick with the smell of burning metal. The defense system's collapse was tearing the underground apart, and time was running out. The man with the scar led the way, his face set with determination. Behind him, the humans and aliens ran together, their earlier differences forgotten in the face of survival. But as they reached a fork in the tunnel, the ground ahead began to collapse, cutting off their path. "We're trapped," one of the humans shouted, his voice filled with panic. The man with the scar turned to the group, his eyes scanning the crumbling walls. "There's another way," he said quickly. "But it's risky. We'll have to go through the old mining shaft. It's unstable, but it's our only chance." The alien commander nodded, his glowing eyes reflecting the urgency of the situation. "Lead the way." The group followed the man down a narrow side tunnel, their movements hurried but careful. The mining shaft was just ahead, its entrance partially blocked by fallen rocks. As they approached, the ground beneath them began to give way. "Go! Go!" the man shouted, pushing the others forward. One by one, they scrambled through the entrance, the tunnel collapsing behind them. But as the last few members of the group made their way through, a massive boulder dislodged from the ceiling, blocking the path completely. The man with the scar turned back, his heart sinking. Krell, the young alien soldier, was still on the other side. "Krell," the commander shouted, his voice filled with desperation. "We need to move the rock." Krell shook his head, his expression calm but resolute. "There's no time," he said. "The tunnel's collapsing too fast. You need to go." The commander's face twisted with anguish. "No. We're not leaving you. Krell placed a hand on the boulder, his glowing eyes meeting the commander's. You have to, he said softly. If you stay, we'll all die. Let me do this. For all of us. The group fell silent, the weight of Krell's words sinking in. The man with the scar stepped forward, his voice filled with emotion. You don't have to do this, he said. There's another way. Krell smiled faintly. Maybe. But this is the surest way. I've already made my peace with it. The commander clenched his fists, his mind racing. He wanted to argue, to find another solution, but deep down, he knew Krell was right. There was no time. Thank you, Krell said, his voice steady. For giving me a chance to prove myself. Tell my family, tell them I died with honor. The commander nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I will, he said, his voice choked with emotion. Krell turned to the humans, his gaze lingering on Lena. Take care of each other, he said. You've shown me that there's more to life than conquest. Don't waste it. Lena nodded, tears streaming down her face. We won't, she whispered. With one final smile, Krell stepped back, his hand still on the boulder. Go, he said. Now. The group hesitated for a moment, their hearts heavy with grief. Then, the man with the scar turned and led them away, his steps quick but deliberate. The commander followed, his head bowed, his mind filled with memories of the young soldier who had given his life to save them. As they ran, the sound of the collapsing tunnel grew louder, and the ground shook with such force that it nearly knocked them off their feet. But they kept moving, driven by the need to honor Krell's sacrifice. When they finally reached the surface, the sky was dark, the air filled with the acrid smell of smoke. The defense system's structure was silent now, its glow extinguished. But the cost of their victory was etched in their hearts. The man with the scar turned to the commander, his face pale but resolute. We made it, he said. Thanks to him. The commander nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. He was brave. Braver than any of us. The group stood in silence, their heads bowed in respect. The humans and aliens, once enemies, now shared a bond forged in loss and survival. They had faced the unimaginable and come out the other side, but the price had been high. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the man with the scar turned to the commander. What will you do now? He asked. The commander looked at the sky, his expression thoughtful. We'll leave, he said. And we'll tell our people what happened here. Earth is not a planet to be conquered. It's a place to be respected. The man nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Maybe someday, he said, our kinds can meet as friends, not enemies. The commander smiled faintly. Maybe. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, its golden light casting long shadows across the graveyard of ships. The defense system's structure stood silent and dark, its once glowing symbols now lifeless. The air was still, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. The group stood together at the edge of the graveyard, their faces weary but resolute. The humans and aliens, once divided by fear and mistrust, now shared a quiet understanding. They had faced the unimaginable and survived, but the cost of their victory weighed heavily on their hearts. The alien commander stared at the horizon, his glowing eyes reflecting the dawn's light. We should leave soon, he said, his voice low. Our ship is still in orbit. If we can reach it, we can return home. The man with the scar nodded, his expression thoughtful. And what will you tell your people? He asked. The commander hesitated, his mind filled with memories of Krell and the sacrifices they had made. I'll tell them the truth, he said finally. That Earth is not a planet to be conquered. That its people are not to be underestimated. And that there are forces in this universe far greater than we can comprehend. The man smiled faintly. That's a good start. The commander turned to him, his expression serious. What about you? What will you do now? The man glanced at the humans standing nearby, their faces filled with a mix of grief and hope. We'll rebuild, he said. We've always been survivors. This is just another chapter in our story. The commander nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. You're stronger than we realized, he said. And braver. The man shrugged. We've had to be. For a moment, the two leaders stood in silence, the weight of their shared experiences binding them together. Then, the commander extended his hand. Thank you, he said. For everything. The man shook his hand firmly. Thank you, he replied. For showing us that not all aliens are our enemies. The group began to prepare for the aliens' departure. The humans helped gather supplies and guide them to a safe spot where their ship could land. It was an uneasy process, filled with quiet moments of reflection and unspoken gratitude. As the alien ship descended from the sky, its sleek hull gleaming in the sunlight, Lena approached the commander. Will we ever see you again? She asked, her voice soft. The commander looked at her, his expression unreadable. I don't know, he said honestly. But if we do, I hope it will be as friends. Lena nodded, a small smile on her face. I'd like that. The aliens boarded their ship, their movements slow and deliberate. The commander paused at the entrance, his eyes scanning the graveyard one last time. He thought of Krell, of the bravery and sacrifice that had saved them all. And he thought of the humans, who had shown him a side of life he had never understood. As the ship's engines roared to life, the humans stepped back, shielding their eyes from the dust and debris. The ship rose into the sky, its silhouette shrinking against the vastness of space. And then, with a flash of light, it was gone. The man with the scar watched until the sky was empty, his heart heavy but hopeful. He turned to the others, his voice steady. It's over, he said. But it's also a new beginning. The humans nodded, their faces filled with a quiet determination. They had faced the impossible and come out the other side. And though the road ahead would be difficult, they knew they could face it together. As they walked back toward their bunkers, the man with the scar paused, his eyes lingering on the graveyard of ships. He thought of all the lives lost, all the battles fought, and all the lessons learned. And he realized that Earth's true strength wasn't in its weapons or its defenses, it was in its people. We'll be ready, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. For whatever comes next. Months had passed since the aliens left Earth. The graveyard of ships remained, a silent testament to the countless battles fought over the planet. But something had changed. The humans, once living in fear and hiding, had begun to rebuild. They emerged from their bunkers, their spirits unbroken, and started to reclaim their world. The man with the scar stood at the edge of the graveyard, his eyes scanning the wreckage. The once imposing alien warships now seemed like relics of a distant past, their jagged hulls covered in vines and moss. Nature was reclaiming the land, as if to remind everyone that life always found a way. Lena approached him, her steps quiet but purposeful. It's strange, isn't it? She said, her voice soft. All this destruction, and yet, here we are. Still standing. The man nodded, his expression thoughtful. We've always been survivors, he said. But this time it feels different. This time, we've learned something. Lena tilted her head, curious. What have we learned? He turned to her, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. That we're not alone in this universe. That there are others out there, some who want to conquer, some who want to destroy, but also some who might want to understand. And that the only way to survive is to stand together. Lena smiled faintly. Like we did with them. Exactly, he said. They came here as enemies, but they left as something else. And so did we. The two stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared experiences binding them together. Then, Lena spoke again. Do you think they'll come back? The man shrugged. I don't know. But if they do, I hope it will be as friends. And if not, we'll be ready. As they walked back toward the settlement, the man paused one last time to look at the graveyard. The wreckage stretched as far as the eye could see, a haunting reminder of the countless lives lost in the pursuit of power. But it was also a symbol of something greater, a lesson etched in metal and blood. The lesson was simple, yet profound: conquest leads only to ruin. Unity leads to survival. The humans had learned this lesson the hard way, but they had learned it well. And as they rebuilt their world, they carried it with them, a beacon of hope in a universe filled with uncertainty. Epilogue: A New Dawn. Far away, in the depths of space, the alien commander stood on the observation deck of his ship. The stars stretched endlessly before him, their light cold and distant. But his mind was elsewhere. He thought of Earth, of the humans who had shown him a side of life he had never understood. He thought of Krell, whose sacrifice had saved them all. And he thought of the graveyard, a silent warning to all who sought to conquer. Turning to his second-in-command, the commander spoke, his voice filled with resolve. "When we return home," he said, "we will tell our people the truth. That Earth is not a planet to be feared or conquered. That its people are not our enemies. And that the greatest strength lies not in power, but in unity." The second-in-command nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And what if they don't listen?" The commander smiled faintly. "Then we'll keep telling them. Until they understand." As the ship sailed through the stars, the commander felt a flicker of hope. The universe was vast and filled with dangers, but it was also filled with possibilities. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance for peace. The lesson. The graveyard of ships remained, a silent sentinel watching over Earth. It was a reminder of the past, but also a promise for the future. A promise that no matter how dark the night, the dawn would always come. And with it, the chance to begin again. For in the end, the greatest lesson of all was this: the true measure of a civilization is not in its power to destroy, but in its courage to unite.